Hello everyone, this is Jonathan here, and in this final video in the Advanced Laser Defender series, we are going to take a look at doing something very cool, and that is adding side guns for our player ship. Okay, so without any delay, let's just hop right into it. So I'm just going to get to my player here in the hierarchy and in the game scene, and first of all, I'm going to get rid of this extra enemy I have in the scene. First of all, we are going to have to add some side guns into the scene. So if you go into your Space Shooter Redux folder that was all part of this project, go into the PNG folder and parts folder. There's an item in here called gun_00 and actually a few others. So find a side gun you like, and we're just going to attach those onto our player, which is a good one. I'll just take this number 0 and I will add that into my players folder. And once that's in there, we are going to drag it onto our player so it becomes a child of that of the player game object. And I'm also going to increase the size here, so I'm going to make it 50 pixels per unit and apply that so they get a little bit bigger. I'm going to rename it to left gun, and I'm just going to move it. It seems like a decent size. Might want to play around with it, but I think I think it'll look a little better if it's facing the other way. So I'm going to change its Z rotation by 180 degrees. That looks okay to me. And now I am going to add some components. I'm going to add a box collider 2D, which is going to be a trigger because that's what our player ship is. I'm going to add a rigid body 2D, and that is also, like our player, going to be a fixed angle and is kinematic. And now I'm just going to duplicate this side gun in the hierarchy, move it onto the other side of our player ship, and call it right gun. And finally, last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of them, and I'm going to add a new script, and I'm going to call the new script side gun. I'll make it singular. Side guns, doesn't really matter, just remember which you call it. And to be organized, I'm going to move that into the player folder I'm going to move that script in here in the player folder. Okay, and last thing, I'm going to apply the prefab, and that should just update it right here in the hierarchy. Now if we start playing and move around, they just follow the player because they're child objects, don't have to do anything special, so that's great. Okay. So now, obviously, it's going to get very, very difficult. We're going to have to basically recreate our entire player level up system and firing, and no, I'm just messing with you. Actually, let's take a look at how we can make this as simple as possible. So go ahead and open up the player controller script and the side gun script that we just created. Okay. So, side guns. How are we going to handle this? Well, number one, I know it's going to need to talk to the player controller, so I'm going to do private player controller, and now what? Well, let's take a look at our start. First things first, player controller equals game object.find. Let's just get this out of the way because we know, not .find object of type. We'll get this out of the way because we know that it's going to need to talk to the player controller. And okay, so we can just copy some code actually from the player controller. I'm just going to do a control search in here. I'm going to copy this whole section over here called fire, and I'm going to move that into the side guns component. Don't need this update. And it says a whole bunch of stuff isn't recognized. Uh-oh, that's going to be a problem, right? Well, no, not really. We just actually, that's why we got reference to this player controller over here. So really, what we can do is, for this stuff, type player controller.projectile, and look at that, it's recognized because these are all set to public in the player controller script. Save myself some typing. I'm just going to copy this code over, paste this here, and paste this here. And current level is highlighted in red, and that's because current level is actually a private variable. So if we hop back over into the player controller script, we are now going to make this a public variable. However, we still don't want it to be touched in the inspector, so we're going to do open square bracket and just type hide in inspector, close square bracket. And now if we hop over to our side guns, that should work. And last thing we need to do, actually I shouldn't have deleted the update because we will need the update, so I'm going to put that right back. I'm going to go over to our player controller script and copy a couple more lines of code. This stuff that handles the firing, so let's copy that over and just paste that in here. Firing rate, so we'll do again player controller dot firing rate. Save that and test it out. Let's see if this works. Oh, you look at that! They shoot! Now the problem is they're invincible right now, which, you know, makes you feel really powerful, but doesn't do much for playing fair. So let's take care of that right away. We'll do void on trigger enter 2D, and then we'll do collider 2D, and we'll just call this collider. So when the side guns get hit by a laser, we're going to do something about that. And what I want to do right now is get a reference to our missiles. Or actually, let's do this. Let's take a look at what happens when our player gets hit by a laser and see where we can copy code. Make it easy on ourselves. Where's the on trigger enter 2D? Here it is. Okay, so we know we need a reference to the missile, so we can just copy that line of code over. And we are going to say if missile, and we'll worry about sound effects and explosions later. Let's just get the stuff we need. So basically these two lines of code, copy those over, paste them in here. And as long as you called your collider 2D a collider, and this line here also says collider, so I'm going to make this bigger so you can see, it should work. So just make sure this is the same name as this, and you're okay. And add a closing squiggly bracket. And in this case, rather than destroying the game object, we're going to say game object with a small g dot set active to be false. And if you watched the previous video, you saw me do this, and all this means is we're basically going to be going into the guns here and unchecking these boxes, which keeps them alive in the hierarchy, but it just makes them invisible. And that's good because it means the script can still be read and everything. So if we play now and we let our side guns get hit, which can be harder to do than you think. Okay, there we go. So I lost the side gun, so we know that's going inactive. And if I shoot, I'm only shooting 10, 2, and there we go. Something went wrong there. Okay, we'll take a look at that later. I want to get the bulk of it done, and then we can troubleshoot the little things afterwards. Okay, so now what we need to do is think about adding a power-up that's going to allow our guns to actually activate. And by the way, the reason the guns kept firing when it got destroyed was because when the object, this is just my best guess, but when the object was set to inactive, it could no longer recognize get key up, so it could no longer cancel the invoke. So a simple way to fix this is just making sure we do cancel the invoke whenever the guns get set to inactive. So if we copy this over here and just paste this line of code over here, we're just giving ourselves a fail-safe to always make sure we're canceling that invoke when it gets set inactive, and that should take care of it. But in the meantime, let's add another power-up, and this is where we're going to use this gold bow we imported earlier. If you didn't import a power-up, now is a good time to do so. So I am going to drag this into the scene. It's already a decent size. I think I have that set to 50 pixels per unit. I do. And this is going to basically have the same components as the health pack, which is a box collider 2D set to is trigger, a rigid body 2D which with the gravity set to 0.5, and we'll have to put a separate script on it as well. So go ahead and add those components now. Box collider 2D is trigger, rigid body 2D with a gravity scale of 0.5. I believe I said, yep, not fixed angle, not is kinematic. That's fine. And add component. We'll have a script, and we'll call this script guns Powerup. Create and add that, and we'll drag that into the Powerups folder. One more thing I forgot to do, on the left and right guns, we also want to tag those as player, set their layer to player, layer to player, that rhymes. And under the sprite renderer, we also want to make sure they're sorting layer player, and just to make sure they're all the same stuff as our player ship. Actually, our player isn't even tagged as player. Yeah, I guess it doesn't really matter. But make sure the both the collision layer and the sorting layers are set to player. Okay, now let's take a look at this guns Powerup script and see what we want to do with it. So open that up down here. So this is, we're going to get into some trickier stuff over here with the whole setting active. I want to point out actually one problem here. We don't want our guns to be active at the start. So what we can do before we start working on our guns Powerup is go back to the side guns, and under here where it says start, under getting the reference to player controller, we can just say GameObject.setActive is set to false, and that way when we start the game, they're going to automatically deactivate themselves. But if we leave them, if we can't have these guns set to inactive when the game starts, or else the script is not going to be able to reread itself, and it's going to cause some problems. So setting active is kind of a weird thing. It can cause some problems until you get used to it, and even when you get used to it, it can still continue to cause problems. Okay, so now let's go into this guns Powerup script. And of course, first things first, we're going to need a void on trigger, enter 2D, and again collider 2D, and it doesn't matter, call it collider, call it trigger, call it whatever you want. And first things first, let's take a look at our health pack script and see what we can copy over. So what happens here? If trigger.gameObject.getComponent is player controller, so basically if our Powerup is interacting with the player, and actually we don't even need this line that says .gameObject, it knows it's the game object by default, so I can just close that down, make it a bit smaller. We are going to need to get another reference here to our player controller. So copy this over because I'm getting tired of typing it. Private player controller. And I can just put that in here. And now we are going to do player controller dot, we haven't created this yet, but we are going to create a method here called activate side guns. And then we are going to destroy the game object, which is the Powerup itself. And that's all we're going to need to do here. I'm going to get rid of this extra code, not needed. Now, there's a reason here. I'm just going to explain this, and I'll admit I played around with this before creating this video. This is where setting active and setting inactive gets a bit weird. We're going to need to go over here into the player controller script and get a reference to the side guns. So I'm going to create public game object array with the 2 square brackets and call it side guns. Now if I save that and go back into here under our player controller script, we are going to have an array on here. Okay, we're not going to see the array yet because I'm getting an error, and that will prevent stuff from updating in the hierarchy. It's a little annoying, so first things first, I have to go over and create a method here and call it public void activate side guns. Save that, and now this should appear here in the hierarchy. Now I'm going to set this to a size of 2. And here's where we're going to run into, we could potentially run into some problems. So we're going to work on the prefab. Update this to 2 in the prefab, and connect our side guns, left gun and right gun. Now here's what I was trying to say before. Originally I tried adding this array onto the power-up itself, the side gun array, and then connecting the guns onto the power-up. But the problem is, the power-up, it does not appear when the level starts, so therefore it cannot get a reference to these side guns on the player ship, which are set to be inactive. However, the player ship is active at the start of the game, and so are its side guns, just for that brief interval, so it has time to get that reference to its own side guns, whereas the power-up does not, because it does not exist at the moment when these guns are active. So we really can't have the power-up itself making the guns active, but we can have it call a method within the player controller script and have that method make the side guns active. I hope that makes sense. That's a lot of use of the word active. Anyways, so now if we go into the player controller script and we go into the bottom here where it says activate side guns, we can do a for each loop here and say for each loop game object guns in side guns, and over here we can say guns.setActive to be true, and if we just want to test it out we can say print setting active, and we can test that out. Okay, so cool. It activates the guns deactivate, and if I go into the console I see it activated twice. These little ships are bugging out, but that has really nothing to do with the guns. That's just well, we are having some problems here with the instantiate not canceling, so obviously that didn't fix the problem entirely. Just a very brief intermission here. The reason those guns kept firing after the player ship died is the exact same reason they kept firing in the side gun script. It's because when the player ship dies, the invoke does not get canceled. So if we just add this line of code here, cancel invoke, fire right before the right before the game object gets set active, that should take care of the problem. So right there, you can test that out if you want, but it's a little hard to duplicate, so I'm not going to show it here, but that should fix the problem. This is running longer than I actually thought it would, so it looks like I'm going to be splitting this into 2 videos as well. So I will see you in part 2, where we will take a look at randomizing the drops, which I'm going to tell you now is a little bit harder than it sounds like. Anyways, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.